Now, imagine a time before DVD box set reissues of classic shows, before online video streaming and the internet enabled fans to share their enthusiasm. Back in the 1970s and 80s, if you missed your cult TV show, then there was nothing except the novelisation. Many of Doctor Who's best episodes were lovingly recreated in prose, often by the original writers like Terence Dicks, and with memorable artwork on the covers of velvet-coated gentlemen battling Cybermen or monsters. Now, 7 Doctor Who novelisations from the original range by Target Books are being reprinted, and some of the original artwork is on display at the Cartoon Museum in London. Award-winning actor and writer Mark Gatiss has played a villain in Doctor Who and written some of its recent episodes, and he was one of those who devoured the books in his youth. I took him to the Cartoon Museum to find out how much these books shaped a generation of dreamers and writers like him. Mark, we're standing in this gallery with all these covers of Doctor Who books, bigger than one would ever have seen, various incarnations, various monsters and Cybermen. What did they mean to you, and why did they mean so much to people who read them?
Well, it's extraordinary to see them like this after all these years. You know, I was so used to them in just small book format. To see the actual original artwork and see the detail, it gives me a kind of Proustian rush. It just takes me right back to being a child, and what these books meant was a huge amount, because they were little capsules of Doctor Who adventures that we had no prospect of ever seeing, because they were from the distant past, i.e. 8 years before, something like that. But then the encapsulation of them in these wonderfully technicolor and sometimes quite lurid covers. This one here is the second one I ever got, which was Doctor Who and the Daleks.
This is with William Hartnell, the first Doctor.
Yeah, and a cover by Chris Achillios. And I was so frightened of this picture that despite the thrill of reading the story, I found it easier to sort of, just look inside than to look at this picture, because Hartnell is so imperious and frightening on this. And looking at it now closely, I can see what I was scared of, because he was a very different looking Doctor to the one we were used to at the time, which was John Pertwee. But this wonderful combination of things, and the colours on the Daleks and the slightly off TARDIS, and the flames coming from the Daleks, something we never really saw. It's fantastic. And you sort of look at it now as a piece of work, and obviously this huge blank at the top where the logo would go. It's a very different thing designing a book cover to doing a sort of piece of artwork.
There's a couple around the corner from the Patrick Troughton era, which I think mean a lot to you. Briefly describe this one here.
This is The Web of Fear, one of my favourite stories, which has recently been rediscovered after all these years. And I remember this book so particularly. It had a gorgeous purple spine. Anybody of a certain age will know. I'm talking to friends here, people who know what it means. Somehow they have a tactile quality, these books, which you can never really reproduce in any other way. There's something about the actual artifact itself. And this beautiful cover, again by Chris Achillios, of a very sort of pensive-looking Patrick Troughton and this wonderful Yeti with its death rays coming out of its eyes and ensnaring the sergeant here. And then this fantastic spiderweb design. I think they're just triumphs of clear and simple and clever design. It encapsulates everything you want from a book called The Web of Fear. Seeing the happy faces all round him, the Doctor shook his head and smiled, his bad temper forgotten. Forgive me, all of you. You weren't to know. You see, it was such a splendid little scheme. I've managed to switch off my Yeti guard and reverse the polarity on that helmet thing before they brought me in. The intelligence wouldn't have drained my brain. I'd have drained the intelligence. Instead, we just got a gigantic short circuit. Then where's the intelligence now? Asked Anne. Did we destroy it? I doubt it. It's back floating around in space somewhere.
The Web of Fear was a set of episodes that disappeared as well, so the book is a record of TV scripts that were lost.
Well, they still are. I think it's under 100 now, but they were wiped by the BBC, and so for many years they were the only record, despite the fact that several of them have come back. These books still are, and Terence Dicks, who wrote a lot of them, was probably the last person to see these episodes before they were wiped, because he was shown them in order to familiarise himself before he wrote the novelisations. So they are still, they're precious artefacts in every sense, really.
And in terms of who wrote them, how many of them were written by the original TV script writers, and how far is the writing of them significant? I think you said you can tell writers like you who grew up on the books because of the way you speak now.
Yes, anyone who uses the word capacious is a target book fan. You can spot people who understand, who are the we, who will talk about people having an old, young face, which is always the description of John Pertwee's Doctor.
What struck me talking to and reading about science fiction writers who grew up on them is how powerful they were. And A.L. Kennedy talks about having to put the books of the cover down, the psychological fear that the monster might escape from the cover. And Amal El-Motar, who's a Canadian fantasy writer, was given the books to read as a child, having never seen the TV series On Holiday in Lebanon, and just thought they were great adventures in their own right.
I think that's a magical story. I love the idea that someone might just think they were a series of sort of slightly eccentric space adventures and then go, there's a what? A TV series? That's a wonderful story. But I can completely understand that. They meant a huge amount to so many people.
Now, of course, all the old available episodes that there are have been lovingly restored. Everything's on DVD. Almost everyone claims to be a Doctor Who fan these days, which must be quite frustrating for people who live through those lean years. It might be hard for some people to understand why these books had the power and the influence they did on minds like yours.
Well, it was the scarcity factor, the fact that those episodes weren't available to see. You had no prospect of ever seeing them again. As I say, many of them are still lost, so they still have that quality. But it wasn't just about filling in the gaps. It was just about the approach to them, the original idea of them, which was to provide escapism for children who obviously were fans of the series or who weren't. They were their own thing. That's what's also rather magical about them. They are spun off a TV series, but the approach was very particular, that you could actually expand on it. There's a lot of good in-jokes, and there's a lot of extra stuff. Malcolm Hulke, who was one of the great writers of the original series, novelised my favourite story, The Green Death, the one with the maggots, which we all remember.
The environmental disaster one with John Pertwee in the 70s.
The Green story. You do remember these things. Turns of phrase, wonderful, rich vocabulary for a kid to get their teeth into, and also, I suppose, just the beginnings of sort of social conscience. And I learnt my entire moral code from the Doctor, and I've never shifted.
If you had to pick one cover here, which is the one that transports you or has the most power, which would it be and why? Can you describe it?
I think of the ones here, and there are far more than I expected. I thought they might have just disappeared. It would have to be the dinosaur invasion, which even in its day was controversial for having the pterodactyl saying across it, which was deemed to be too comic strip-like. But he had this wonderful thing of combining the colour painting with a sort of almost sort of pointillist black and white illustration. There's something, I don't know what it is, but the two things sort of shouldn't work, but they do.
And of course it's got Big Ben in the background and an Apocalypse Now sunset. It's London and the Doctor in his cape.
What more can you possibly want?
Mark Gatiss, who was rushing off to film the new series of Sherlock. The 7 novelisations are out now in paperback. Doctor Who, the Target Books artwork, is on display at the Cartoon Museum in London until the 11th of May.